Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast, one of my favorite segments and best friend for actually getting crap done in your dental practice, Caitlyn Embry. How's it going, Caitlyn?
Doing well. Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
This is going to be fun because we've talked about things in the past where communicating to the team. I actually had a conversation with a dentist the other day who is struggling in his marriage, and he was frustrated because he was like, my wife, all she really wants is like, she's not buying into my vision of where I want my practice to go and all these other things. He's like, she just wants me to communicate better. I was like, dude, that's such a win that she told you just communicate better. Like, we can work on that. And this is actually both. I mean, your spouse might not care about all the details of your practice and your vision in the minutia, but your dental team actually needs to be communicated these details, and they need the buy-in. They need to be part of that picture in that conversation. And so, why does this come up as something that we're talking about today? That I think sometimes we assume everyone knows what we're thinking. Where have you seen this come up?
Well, we are pretty fresh off of the in person course that we held in Scottsdale last month, and it was team leadership based. So on my side of things, I got to speak to team leads, whether it be office managers. We had a lot of dental assistant leads in the room who had never been to any sort of leadership training or CE before, lead hygienists as well, lead front office. It's really what we geared it toward. Meanwhile, there were dentists in the other room hearing from George and kind of going through our practice management course, right? And so we had some overlap there. And when we did our breakouts after that first morning where everyone kind of heard from George, and of course, George was touching on vision because here at Shared Practices, we always start there. It was amazing to me how many team members in my audience shared that they're very unclear. They don't know what the vision is. And it was actually really interesting because we had a mix of folks who had never heard of us, who their doctor sent them or their doctor was in the room next door, but they weren't familiar, weren't a part of our coaching program yet. And then we also had some coaching clients in the room, some teams that work with me and all of our other coaches as well. And I was really proud of the fact that our SP team members were like, "Oh yeah, no, I know the vision. It's profitable group, and we're going to start here, and then we're going to go to 10 ops, and we're going to go for 20 hygiene days." They knew it for the most part down pat because that's what we do in our coaching is getting really clear on this, and then hey, share that with the team so they know where we're going. But so many of them were coming up to me at the break and asking certain questions. Well, how do I handle this? And I can't tell you how much of it came down to, well, what's your doctor's vision? Where do they want to go with this practice? And then we're going to use that to kind of be our guide map to solve for some of these issues that are coming up. And does it make sense for the ultimate vision? And that's how you get them bought into what you're saying too.
Well, it's interesting that you say that so many of the dentists that haven't worked with shared practices, their team members didn't really know the vision. I think a lot of times we don't have language to describe the vision,
Right.
and that's one of the things that I go back to this slide over and over and over. That when George first presented our main practice management course, that showed all the practice avatars of like one doctor, one hygienist, one doctor, two hygienists, all the way up to two doctors, four hygienists, and what these avatars look like, and the numbers, and how they function, and moving between these steps. And it was just one of those that like you see it and you can't unsee it. And now you have language for the rest of your career to talk about types of practices. And when you start like looking at potential practices, you can very clearly fit them into these boxes of like, oh, okay, this is where it is. And I can see based on the facilities where it could go. And that would be pretty cool. If I bought this one and grew it into a profitable group, then, it would be there's a big opportunity here. And the fact that you know where you're going, I think so many doctors don't even know what their vision is, and then they don't have the language to be able to communicate that to their team.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think for the first part of this episode, I want us to talk through what a vision could really look like because there's so many different facets of it. And I think even if you can just take off a piece of it and get a few bullet points out of the most important things to you, and share those with at least your leadership team and potentially your whole team when you're ready. Really what should be included in that vision, and what are some ideas to get you started, you know?
Okay. Well, as always, like when we start doing one of these episodes, the wheels start turning, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I want you to poke holes in this framework that I'm about to put out here, and see if there's a better starting point than this. And Caitlin sends me notes beforehand, and then I ignore them, and it drives her nuts. It's great. Just
I didn't
kidding.
say that.
Just kidding. I like watching your face of like,
Yeah.
"Where's she going with this?" I see kind of a few different big elements that maybe people get these conflated when you're talking about practice vision. One is the anatomy of what your practice looks like in its fully grown form, of how many doctors, how many team members, the size and the scale and the scope. And that's what we just talked about with these avatars,
Right.
having the tools and the language to describe that. That can include like financial avatars and numbers and
Right.
goals and benchmarks. You don't have to share all of those with the team or with the whole team, like you were saying. But I think that's like one of them that's very concrete.
Yes.
There's also your philosophy of care. Like, what do we want our patient experience to be? And articulating that vision and why we care so much about doing things a certain way. And then I think there's also the vision of your team culture. And so, being able to articulate to your team how we want to operate together, what are our values, how do we hire and train and reinforce. And I feel like all three of those make up your vision for your practice. But sometimes if you don't kind of separate those out, people might get them confused when we talk about what is our vision, which one of these are we talking about. And I think right now we're talking about the growth pathway and the where we want to go in terms of the business side of the practice. And then those soft side, the culture and the vision for patients, those are things that like you can implement now. They don't require the practice to grow into a certain size to look like that. So I don't know. What are your thoughts around the kind of breaking out a vision into those three parts?
Well, I agree. I think that's a great framework, and just, hey, start there. I think to your point, the basics of it have to be number of operatories, number of dentists, number of hygienists. What does that then mean for number of assistants, number of front office support? And so laying out how what infrastructure you'd like to need, then that kind of informs you of how many patients do you need in order to sustain that staff, right? And you might need help from a coach to figure that out if you're not, going to our seminars, or already working with us. And then that informs as well, what what type of practice you want to have when you walk in every morning, to your point, that culture and the patient experience of, is this, for example, if your vision is to grow to a mega group with 3 plus dentists, and potentially then once you've done that, buy a second location and build that out with even more dentists, you may be choosing to play the volume game of being in network with quite a few PPO insurances. Maybe you're in a very urban area where there's a lot of competition, and so volume is important, right? And so communicating that with the team of every patient matters, and new patient flow needs to be at 65 a month at a minimum, and we're going to do online scheduling, and we're going to make room for emergencies same day always, and we're going to focus on reappointing them into hygiene, and we're going to, invest a lot into marketing, so that means the new patient phone call needs to be X, Y, or Z. All of that, right? Versus if you're someone who has 5 operatories, you're maxed out, you have no interest in hiring another associate, or an associate, I should say. You wanna continue to be a solo, and you've realized now the way to grow is to actually cut back on insurance, maybe go fee for service, then volume is not your game. And so the training of your team, and what we're prioritizing on our schedule is going to look completely different, and how we handle team matters might be completely different. So all of these kind of go into your vision of how does it look? How does it feel? What's the size of it? How many team members do we need? And to your point about financials, of course, there are production and collections benchmarks that go along with these, but I don't want that to be a hindrance to someone just not setting a vision whatsoever, because maybe they're unclear about what they want to collect, or they don't want to share that with anybody else. It doesn't have to be included. But of course, it lends itself to those conversations as well.
Well, that actually made me realize, okay, there's a fourth component. So, we're just expanding the framework as we go. But this is probably where we should have started, which is what is the life you want to build? And George talks about this in our courses of backwards plan from that. Like, where do you want to be clinical 2, 3, 4, 5 days? What do you actually want if you could wave a magic wand? And what type of income and retirement plan and plan for scaling wealth, all of those things, the more clear you are on that, then you can backwards plan, okay, I am more entrepreneurial and I do want to scale to a larger size or have multiple offices if you're willing to take the plunge, despite my warnings. And then you can take that back into what are the goals and the targets and the size of office. But I think important to the team having buy-in, which is what we've talked about in the past, is understanding why. Like when you're introducing a new system, if you come to your team and be like, "Hey, I just listened to this podcast and they were talking about doing scheduling in this way," or I went to some random seminar or course, because there's so many ways you can build systems, there's so many tweaks, there's so many changes you can make, and your team can fatigue so quickly on change. And there's only so much you can change and audit and reemphasize and actually truly integrate into the DNA of your practice. If they don't know why, and you can't articulate why this supports the vision of your practice, of where it's going, they're going to have a hard time buying into the changes you're making in the practice. And it's going to feel arbitrary. It's going to be like, okay, well, now why are we doing this? Now why are we doing that? So all of that, you may not share with your team your lifestyle vision of eventually how many days you want to be practicing, how soon you want to retire, how much money you want to make, which then will inform your practice vision, goals and collections and all of that. But definitely helping them understand exactly where we're going influences the implementation and the leadership and the accountabilities and the metrics and then the culture and the how work feels when they show up every single day, because you want them to go on this journey with you. You don't want this to be, sometimes like team members self-select pretty quick of like, okay, this was an acquisition and the old doc never grew, never had plans or ambitions in this way, and they're not here for it. I mean, it's better to find that out sooner rather than later. You need the right people on board. You need to be rowing in the same direction. So I just think there's a whole chain that kind of cascades from knowing exactly where you want to go. And that's the first piece of work you have to do, is deciding that.
Well, right. And perhaps you have achieved a lot already in practice ownership and you might be at a place where you're happy. Maybe a lot of your goals have been met and now it's just kind of time where you want to maintain. You want to get a little bit better, a little bit sharper, but the vision might not be super drastic change-wise and that's okay too. But there always has to be something we're rowing towards, to your point. Otherwise people get complacent, people get bored. And so maybe that is, hey, next year I'm good if we collect the same amount, maybe a little bit more, but I really want to hone in on developing an operations manual so that this can be scalable and this can be sustainable. Or, I've added some ortho to the practice. It's going well. I just kind of like to see us really do 3 or 4 cases a month very consistently. I'm going to really have us all focus in on ortho. It could be these very specific things that are just going to be tweaks as well. And, I'll tell you that I then use the vision to coach team members how to get through to the practice owner and how to relate to the practice owner. And so, what had happened at the team leadership course was a lot of fantastic team members who I could tell really cared a lot about their doctor, a lot about the practice, were happy to be there, sent to CE. And they had this one problem. In my particular day, we were talking a lot about team, setting up roles and responsibilities and team development and who should be doing what at the front, who should be doing what in the back. And I had people coming up going, hey, I am the person like you talked about that's doing way too much at the front, but my doctor doesn't see that. How do I get them to see that this is too much for one person? And, just as an example, right? And it's coming from a place of, I want to put my best foot forward, but at this point, we have way too many patients as an example. And so team is starting to kind of have the language and the tools as well to go, oh, we've got 12 hygiene days. We only have 1.5 for an office. I can use this information to go to my doctor and say, just from a mathematical perspective, this doesn't make sense. And doctor, you told me your vision was this. So we might need some more support here if we want to get you where you're going.
With that too, I mean, how amazing would it be if that team member has seen your framework of the 4 kind of roles of a front desk team, and at that point, if there's 1.5, they're probably splitting them between
Right,
those
right.
people, and maybe the doctor is taking some of the office manager type things. And what if that
Hmm.
team member came and said, "Hey, supporting your vision, this is actually the role that I'd love to be in long term. Here's the stuff I love doing. And here's the role that maybe we could be looking towards hiring. And here's the
Right.
roles and responsibilities and how I would help train and screen and all of that." And like, I don't expect every team member to have that kind of clarity on what is needed for the practice. But I think the more the team member understands, you're exactly right, the more they can convey and be helpful and get the support that the office truly needs.
Because what I teach both in person and with my coaching clients when I get the privilege of meeting and working with teams is they'll bring to me how, this is going on. Should I bring it up to doctor? This is going on. How do I get them to see that this is a problem? How do I get them to see that this is an opportunity? I have this great idea. I always say, well, let's go back to their vision. And is this in support of that? Yes or no? Is this a detriment to that? Yes or no? And let's say I'm an office manager and I'm really struggling because there's somebody who works at the front office who is on their phone a lot and kind of like walks away from the desk a lot, and so patients are left with you know phones going to voicemail or no one's there to greet them, and it's like doctor loves this person and thinks they're super nice. How do I get them to see like we really need to put a corrective plan in place here? And it's, well, doctor, your vision is a fee for service practice where patients choose us despite our insurance network, da, 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 right? So that means that customer service needs to be 5 stars. So as your OM, I'm concerned that we've got someone in this very much like face of the practice role who isn't in service of that very boutique, comprehensive, type of environment that you're trying to build. So make it about them is my advice to the team. So your team has to know what you want.
I hope we haven't scared owners off now of like, crap, the team's going to leverage my vision against
Yeah.
me to get what they want.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but hopefully you have team members who
Are bought
wanna
in.
help you get there. Yeah, like, this is, this is gonna be for those team members who you've hired for a reason, who are leaders in your practice for a reason and take it seriously and wanna help you get where you wanna go, but they can't do that if you don't tell them?
And it can go both ways too, where you come back and say, "I agree, we will need another role, another person in this role. However, we need to add 2 more hygiene days, and when we do that is when we're hiring." And now you're on the same page. It's like, I see it, I know you're overworked right now, but we're on the cusp of having kind of enough patience to get on the other side of that. And now everyone's on the same page because it's like, okay, this is maybe a little unsustainable, but I know where we're going and it's going to be more sustainable. And that conversation is productive and healthy on both sides.
Well, right. The doctor can also go back to their vision, to your point, it kind of in reverse and go, "Hey, I see this idea you have. You're bringing this as an issue to me or an opportunity to me. I actually don't think that that's going to apply here in our practice, and here's why." So it might be great 2 doors down at a practice who's trying to do something different, but that particular issue isn't as big of a deal because this is actually what I'm trying to get us to. We could go into examples of what that could be, but it's just clarity. It's clarity for everyone because we can only really be focused on those 2 to 3 major rocks at any given time. And so sometimes we're team is wanting to solve for something that you don't see as important because you haven't maybe clearly shared your vision to be able to kind of explain to them why it's not as important, you know?
And that comes back to bottlenecks, like this concept
Yeah.
of when you're going a specific direction, there are things in the way of you getting there versus when you're just kind of like standing there looking in any direction, there's an infinite number of changes you could make.
Right.
And so your team just has to like kind of raise their hand the loudest and say,
Mhm.
here's what needs fixed, here's what needs fixed. But when you can say clearly, like, actually, because we're going here, this
Mhm.
is the thing that's going to stop us. So we have to tackle this first. This is our number one priority, this is
Right.
number two
Right.
priority. And when you're all speaking the same language, you can stay focused on those bottlenecks.
Yeah, it was clear to me in that room just that these conversations weren't being had. And so, I'm curious from your perspective, how often do you think there should be a conversation around vision? Do we go back to it on a semi-regular basis? I'm sure there's constant updates. I know I see that. The vision might change a little bit. So, what has been your experience in practice ownership of meeting cadence and maybe how often we'd go back to the very big picture of, hey team, as a reminder, here's where we're going.
I think number one, it depends on the rate of change.
Mhm.
So if we're in kind of aggressive growth mode where we're adding days, we're adding team members, like you need to be talking about this monthly because there is, and then operationally there might be takeaways from that monthly meeting that are coming up on a weekly basis. But if it's a little bit slower kind of long-term growth, then maybe you're only talking about this with the whole team quarterly. But I think you can't over communicate this. Same thing with core values, the same thing with our patient vision. Like we think we're saying the same thing over and over and over, but what we don't realize is for every time we've listened to a course or a podcast or we've thought about something 30, 40 times because we know where we want to go, we've said it maybe once and maybe half the team understood and half the team of those that understood were actually, or half the team was really truly paying attention and only half of those really truly understood what you're saying. And so we should be sick of saying these things. That is the indicator of like, I feel like I'm repeating myself too often. It means you're probably communicating it just enough.
I would agree with that. I don't think it can be over communicated, especially if you keep the vision simple and easy to digest. And when there are changes, you bring it to that quarterly meeting at the very least, and you update it. And here's the why, and here's where we're going. Because I'm always teaching and saying, as team members, as managers, as coaches, we are here to build the house that your doctor wants to live in. And so it's not the house I want to live in or what my last practice did or it's theirs. And so if we don't do that, then we're not doing our jobs. And we're here along the way to maybe course correct if we think, there's something that needs to change. But we're here to build that. And so it needs to be understood by all and repeated often, to your point.
It's funny because we get to talk about on this podcast so much of the people who have thought a lot about this ahead of time and have bought a practice with their vision in mind, and are in like a room full of possibilities of like, here's all the good things and here's where we can go. In the recent months, as I've talked more and more about burnout, and I've even launched a new podcast since we've recorded last called Next Level Dentist. Season one is talking about like the ultimate extreme of burnout and mental health, which is suicide. So season one is understanding suicide in dentistry, and it like that might seem pretty dramatic, and I'm just trying to learn on air. I'm trying to understand this for myself, for the dentists that I've talked with who are in a dark place. The flip side of this is not knowing where you're going or why, and then taking on all the burdens of practice ownership and maybe not having the success that the podcast promised you. People can get in a really dark place because they feel so trapped and they don't have perspective on what is even possible in this practice? Where can this practice go? And maybe they're right on the other side of breaking through patient numbers and profitability that, like, oh, okay, the reason I'm struggling so hard is my fixed costs are here. I've only got one column of hygiene. I've got maybe five hygiene days a week. And it feels like I'm barely, paying the bills. But if we were to get to the other side of filling out this solo doctor practice, there would be so much more breathing room. Or maybe we tried to expand to two doctors too quickly. And so there aren't enough patients going around and we have more overhead. And to say, maybe I still want to go to two doctors, but I have to take a step backwards first before I take that step forwards. So I think there is really, we talk about all the positive upside of having all of this. There's also serious repercussions where you don't really realize where you're going and feel pretty trapped. And this can be one of the most liberating exercises is talking with you and saying, I don't even know, is this practice worth saving,
Mhm.
worth growing? Is it worth doing the coaching? And when you can look at the practice and see, actually, no, you've got the bones of a good practice, and here's what's on the other side and here's how we can help you get there. I think it's a pretty incredible, transformative conversation that leads to a whole just different relationship to your dental practice overall.
I think you're right that I would say a good majority of the coaching clients that I've started with over the years know their vision. We have them fill it out on the intake form, and so sometimes there's definitely some, "Oh, I need some help kind of fine tuning this, but this is what I'm thinking." But to your point, I do discovery calls with dentists who are feeling like, okay, I'm in a rock and a hard place. I'm burned out. I'm the only dentist here, or but I can't afford to do this. I only have this many patients. Like, what would you do if you were me? Kind of thing. And so I would love to start dentist coaching with us a little bit earlier before they hit that spot.
Yeah.
And, we talk about when people come to see us in Scottsdale that we want to provide this trajectory changing experience where they understand their vision better than ever. And they might have thought they were going to do one thing, but they decide to do another because they really took the time to understand the different pathways and make that choice earlier on before it's, quote unquote too late. I would love to connect with dentists a little bit sooner before we're in this really dark spot help them actually define what can be done based on your location, based on your patient base, based on your break even point every month. What can be done? Here are your options to get you to at least a pivot point, and then, hey, maybe you sell, maybe you want out, but it's at least a better spot you were in. Or maybe you're going, okay, I've got this. I actually do think I can take this further. And so that's why I think we get on here and we talk about, what do you want? What is your vision? And have you shared it with those who are helping you get there, whatever that looks like in your team and your spouse, to your point, absolutely. Because maybe they can kind of help before it gets to a place where you feel this stuck.
I have a hard time when like a dentist is in one of those really hard places, but they're not willing to make a lot of changes. They're not willing to bring on a coach. And at that point, I would be like, if I'm practicing 4 days a week in my practice and I can't afford coaching, quote unquote, I would go and work 2 extra days a week temporarily to be able to afford it so that I can leverage my original practice. And that'd be a short period of time. I know dentists who are in a spot where they have to work 6 days a week temporarily just to like get the financial leverage to get through a hard time. And yeah, that is going to burn people out worse. But when you, once again, this goes back to when you have a vision of where you're going, it makes things that didn't seem bearable or possible seem like, okay, this is worth it. I can see what's on the other side of this.
There's light at the end of the tunnel, and that's where I kind of talk about, "Hey, we're getting you to a pivot point here. We know your long-term vision. What we're doing at this stage is not necessarily your actual vision, but it's in service of that. So let's do this for X amount of time, and then we're predicting by this day next year, we'll be ramping up to place an ad or, whatever that case may be." But I think that gives hope too of like, "Hey, it's in service of my vision long term."
100%. It's George's phrase, and I hate to steal his thunder here. It's like anything you want in life, nothing off the table. It's a really powerful realization. In dentistry, we have lots of options. In practice ownership, we have lots of options. We have a lot of power to create the world and life that we want. And sometimes we need some help to get there. So if people want to reach out to you, what would be the best way? They need to have one of these high level conversations of, I think I need coaching. I think I know where I want to go, or maybe I don't know where I want to go. How could they best reach out to you?
Yeah, my email is caitlin@sharedpractices.com. And we can chat and kind of figure out who would be the best coach for your scenario. We have many, many coaches on the team with such a vast array of experience and different parts of the country as well. And so just really chatting about next steps, just send me an email and we can go from there. And I hope folks go over to your new show as well if this has resonated to kind of talk more about the mental health aspect of practice ownership because the Shared Practices podcast, we do touch on this absolutely, but we're very analytics driven, we're very business driven, and we always want to give you those actionable items and the golden nuggets that you can take and implement and work on tomorrow. But I think it's important to slow down a little bit and do a check in emotionally because it's a lot on your shoulders as dentists, as practice owners, as leaders. Also, you've got to be there for your team, kind of going back to the root of this episode being once you've got this, share it. You need to be that guiding light for your team. They're craving that direction. So figure out what it is that you need to be the best version of yourself so you can lead in that way.
Well, the overall hypothesis of Next Level Dentist is the now what question. And so it's practice ownership leads to kind of 2 points oftentimes. It leads to the burnout, stress, now what point, or it leads to the success of like, man, I'm more successful than I ever thought I would be. Now what? And is it practice? Is it a bigger practice? Or is it investing in these other areas of my life? And so that question is kind of the 2.0 of what's the next vision? And can you create a next vision that doesn't get yourself into more trouble? Because you thought more was going to be more, and you're chasing a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that may or may not exist. So thanks for sending people over to that one, and hopefully people get some value. And whether people are suffering or they're successful and they're trying to figure out what's next, those are the kind of conversations that we're having over on Next Level Dentist. But Caitlyn, thank you so much. Coach's Corner, this is always a blast. We always just like rubber meets the road. Let's actually change practices on this episode. And I feel like we've done that again today.
Yes, thanks, Richard, and always good to talk on here. So we'll see you all next time.
We'll talk on the Shared Practices podcast.